Hello and welcome. You are listening to an informed take on current events brought to you by law students and staff of Queen's University Belfast. This is Lawpod.
Hi, welcome to Lawpod. I'm Professor Aoife O'Donoghue and I work here at Queen's University Belfast. Today I'm going to talk to Dr. Meabh Harding, who is the co-director with myself of Doing Feminist Legal Work. So we're going to talk about what Doing Feminist Legal Work is, what our hopes for the project for the future, and our event that we're holding tomorrow in Queen's on the 19th of May.
And also what a fun network it is and how you should join.
So just to give a bit more background about myself, my research is in international and constitutional law, but with a strong thread through all of it really on feminism. So I was the co-director of the Northern/Ireland Feminist Judgments Project. And as well as doing feminist legal work, I'm also the co-director of the Northern/Ireland Feminist Constitutions Project.
And I'm Dr. Meabh Harding, and I'm recently returned to UCD, where I'm the lecturer in family and child law. So my research really revolves around how regulation of family life affects the family, particularly women and children. So it's inherently feminist in nature. And I like empirical research. I like going out and finding out how people interact with the law and how the law interacts with them. And I am the co-director of Doing Feminist Legal Work. And I've also worked with Aoife on the Northern/Irish Feminist Judgments Project and the Alternative Mother and Baby Homes report. So lots of feminist work going on here.
And we should mention our two other co-partners who are both at Birmingham University Law School. That's Professor Fiona de Londres and Professor Mairead Enright, both of whom were very much involved with the repeal campaign and abortion reform more generally across the whole island. So that's who we are, and we're going to talk a little bit more now about the actual network. So DFLW is what we're calling it, even though that doesn't really sound like it's short when I say it out loud. It's mainly a network of scholars based across Ireland, Northern Ireland and Britain who are interested in issues coming from law and gender as a perspective. We were very lucky to get some Irish Research Council funding from the new foundation's Shared Island Scheme. To do a project that is north-south and east-west. And all the work that myself and Meabh have been involved with so far really to do with feminism has always been like that, because it's not... Yeah. It isn't a huge group of lawyers, so wherever we can find people basically and who are interested and enthusiastic. So it's always been a sort of groups of feminists working east-west, north-south, helping and mentoring and supporting each other. The network is hoping to create kind of a long-term sustainable network, even though we've only funding for the first year, to include academics, obviously, but including PhD students and PGR students have already been coming to our events and are brilliant, but also artists, activists, practitioners, civil society, anyone who's interested in the way that law and feminism and gender all interact.
Yeah, we're defining feminist legal work very broadly, so we don't want to feel like people are excluded from where their discipline is or if they're an academic or not an academic. We're interested in getting the work done and using as many fun and diverse people as possible to do it.
And of course we're building on like lots of really amazing work that's happened already and work that we've been involved with, but it often tends to be ad hoc, and you kind of have to start with your mailing list and people you know and try to build the network out from then. So what we're hoping by setting up this network is that when something happens suddenly, there needs to be a feminist response, or there's a long-term project that needs done, that there will already be kind of a group who are together, who are interested, who maybe might not be directly involved, but maybe be able to offer mentorship or practical advice on how to do these things. And obviously building an amazing work that's gone before on abortion, on repeal, on women's representation and access to politics and law. If you look, say, around women's representation or access during the peace process in Northern Ireland, or around poverty, but also how women's lives are impacted through law and by law and all different kinds of law, not just sort of the usual things that we think of. So we're hoping to kind of build a long-term sustainable group, which kind of sounds a bit corporate-y.
I mean, do you want to talk about why we came up with the idea? And because it does, those are a lot of buzzwords you throw around there, Aoife. Like, in a sense, we just want a space to do this work. And we felt that space wasn't there, or is there for brief periods, but could be stronger and could be a more inclusive space, and one that people can rely on when they're trying to do this kind of work. And were we talking about it at the ILT conference in Cork?
Yes, I think so. Went out for a walk on the banks of the Lee.
That's so often the best ideas come from Cork, is what I've heard from Aoife.
So I think it was because we were presenting on the rewrite of the Mother and Baby Home report that we'd both been involved in. So that was a project when the report came out in the Republic, and this is an example of a stark difference between a report coming out across the island, two of which are very different. So the report that was published in Northern Ireland, the official report, is of very different character. It treats the women and the children with a lot of respect and a lot of dignity, and listened and heard from them, whereas the one that was published in Dublin didn't quite do any of those things. So
no, it was very disappointing in that regard, and people had very strong reactions to it. And it was during COVID as well. We were all kind of locked down and looking at our screens, and Aoife O'Donoghue got
it was about 20, I suppose, in this immediate group.
Yeah, got together and tried to do something about it, tried to show how a more appropriate and respectful and sort of a different idea of looking at it could be reached, even just on the flawed evidence that had been put forward to that committee, because it was a deeply flawed process. We need to acknowledge that when we're talking about the report, but it was important to us, and it was. I think people found it very worthwhile and a way of constructively releasing some of the frustration that they felt with that report and how that process had gone.
It kind of showed the different kinds of knowledge that you needed to do it, because we needed people who knew how to do legal history, people who knew law and religion. We had people who knew criminal law, family law, like yourself. Like, you needed a range of expertise. You couldn't do it as an individual project or 2 or 3 people. Like, you needed the 20 people to do it quickly and to do it fast and to do it in a way that could help all the amazing activists and academics who've been working on this for years, and our very small contribution to all their work that they've been doing.
Because that's kind of an important point about doing the reactive stuff, is that there are people who are beavering away doing this work, unacknowledged for years and years and years. And then when you do a piece of reactive work, it's how to include all of that and give credit to the work that's done before, while helping in some way by like adding to that, or amplifying that, or adding to those voices. And it was a nice way. It was a nice way of working together. And people did different things, didn't they? So they, some people worked closely in pairs, some people worked individually and sent stuff back to the group. There was a lot learned about working collaboratively in what was a very difficult time. I think to do that kind of work was like January of the longest lockdown in Europe.
Yeah.
And we decided to look at mother and baby homes, the most uplifting sort of legal topic that you could look at in the depths of January in a pandemic. But it was important work and it needed to be done. And I think, people felt it was worthwhile. And
I think because it was a difficult topic, it was a good group to be in as well, because it is a difficult topic, and there was a lot of sensitivities in it that you had to think about really deeply, and we could offer advice and help and support to each other about how to phrase things and think about things and write them in a way that was respectful and was dignified and was thought through as much as we thought we could, at least. And of course, we got lots of different historians and activists to read it as well before we published it, to do that as well, like that big broader group. I think there was another 20 people who read it after we did our first draft.
But coming back to kind of the idea of an inclusive and helpful space, I think having that support was really helpful for people who hadn't worked on that kind of stuff before and maybe weren't ready for the emotional toll that might have, and were worried that they might say something that was inadvertently insensitive, and not wanting to do that and wanted to be supportive of survivor groups. And the structure meant that people were able to engage with that who otherwise perhaps would have wanted to have done something but not known what to do, or not been able to find a thing to do.
Which I think is probably what inspired us, right? Was that there would be kind of a ready-made group that would be there to, even if they weren't directly involved, to even just persuade people, because it was the same in the feminist judgments, I think, was persuading people who hadn't done this kind of work before.
I kind of think of it like a feminist A-team, sort of like turning up, solving problems, less 80s baggage, we hope.
But also I think, on that, also to share their frustrations, because that one of the amazing bits about doing the Feminist Judgments project was when we would have people in, like, say, Alva Smith, who'd been working on feminist issues for years are Monica McWilliams, who came to our very first Feminist Judgments workshop, which is at Ulster University, and just somebody who'd been persevering on these things for years and just
Real long haul.
And kind of going, wow. And you're still here and you're still enthusiastic and you're still positive and you're still mentoring everybody, even though like you've had to put up with a lot over a long period of time.
I mean, there's so many inspiring people involved in this that the network is working with or is getting advice from or the experiences of. And they are people who have really put in the grind over the years, and perhaps in spaces that are not so supportive. So it's trying to build on the work of these excellent people and make things easier for people to do this kind of work going forward, and also make it less emotionally difficult when it can. And some of it is not. I mean, some of it is the crack and eating cake and all that kind of stuff. But there are heavy subjects in some instances that need to be tackled, and it's easier to do that in a space with people who also understand the kind of area and what's going on and how you might feel about it.
Yeah, I think appreciating that different spaces. I've been in Queen's for a year, and there's plenty of feminists here in the law school, and there's people to talk to. And in my previous institution at Durham, it was similar. We had like amazing people like Claire McGlynn, but not everybody has that sort of support or space. Or there was a module here that Yasmin Brunger developed with Catherine McNeely on gender in the law in third year that students can take. And that I was lucky enough to teach last year with Sarah Craig, like that they're there. But not everyone is lucky enough to be in those kind of spaces where you've got a group of people who are interested in feminism or issues around gender you can go have a chat with.
Yeah, I mean, I felt that very much so coming back to working in Dublin after a long time at Warwick University, where again, it was a very inclusive feminist space, and working with people like Vanessa Monroe or Shaheen Ali. And you didn't have to kind of justify feminist work or like no one asked any questions. Everybody thought it was inherently valuable and worthwhile. And then to maybe go to a university that doesn't, I've got to be very careful about what I say here. Well, just within the university space. So I was doing the, what's that leadership project? The Aurora Leadership Project.
Aurora, yeah.
Yeah, so you met a lot of academics from different universities and this kind of thing. And I was just struck that there was a lot of people doing work on their own and sort of feeling unsupported and floundering a bit and wanted to do this kind of work, but also having to justify this kind of work, which I also had to do, but it was mystery to me. Like I went back to when I used to work at another university in England where I once had to make a business case for doing family law, which I was like, well, everybody has a family. I'm not really sure what the business case is, that the grant is fully funded. So this idea of I think there is a lot of individual academic work going on in the South that perhaps those community of scholar networks that we're used to from the UK research intensive universities are only developing, or sometimes in some of the universities not really there. So it's to try and also the numbers are smaller, right? Like it's a smaller scene. So it's to sort of bring that confidence and fun and support because I mean, let's face it, academia can be quite a lonely gig if you're working in a place which may have really strong research strengths, but they're not questions that you particularly could care to pursue. And then you're bringing your stuff in, which maybe is new, or, people don't really think that is maybe a question that they care to pursue. And then it is nice to be validated in your area, or to have people who think that those questions are indeed questions that are worth pursuing and are questions that are of value. And I think that can be a lonely space for people, particularly scholars starting off, like early career researchers, which can be wonderful. Obviously, you can have a wonderful supervisor who really values what you do, helps you, mentors you, all the rest. But let's face it, like a lot of people don't get that. And then it can be a little bit hard to find your tribe, as Vanessa Monroe used to put it. Find your research tribe within the big space that is the academy, right? Because
I'm always really impressed with people who, even from like their PGR years, because like Meabh O'Rourke or Sandra Duffy, that even as PhD students were doing amazing work and trailblazing. And even think my own PhD students here at Queen's who are doing amazing things already.
Yeah.
And sort of you're like, wow, I wish I was that brave when I was at your point to be willing to put my head above the parapet and kind of be out and changing things.
Well, I think it's great that we're contributing to an academic culture where people are braver, right? Like, because that is something that is built upon generation by generation. So I think sometimes when you look at that, you kind of go, oh, I wish I had been that brave. And you're like, well, I'm great that we're putting supports in place that people, in addition to their inherent utter brilliance as academic individuals, feel supported to put themselves out like that to do bigger projects.
And can have the fun.
And can have the fun, right? Like,
yeah. So I do think that was one of the best things about the Feminist Judgments project was everybody, it was a lovely space to work in. And I think we talked about that in the ALT as well, that it wasn't a none of the workshops were competitive. No, like people were sharing ideas. There wasn't any one-man-upship going on in any of the workshops. That it was, I think we tried to replicate that in our first event in Dublin, that it was about care and support and mentoring and hearing ideas and sometimes expressing things that maybe people didn't want to hear, but saying them in a space that you could say it in and it was okay, but not that kind of jockeying.
I think
academic,
the feminist judgments
elbows out space,
or just the peacocking that you have to do in ref culture, telling everyone how great your research is. World leading and paradigm shifting, just paradigms moving all over the place all the time. But I think with that was the first drafting workshop I'd actually been to, was the Feminist Judgments Project. So maybe we should tell the listenership what that we were actually writing together as a group, which at that point was kind of new to me, because usually people kind of come and they talk about their stuff and ask a few questions and go away. But that was just a really nice collaborative project.
So in that one we rewrote judgments from a feminist perspective. So it's a methodology that started in Canada and then was developed in England by Claire McGlynn and Rosemary Hunter and Erica Rackley, and then we imported it, and we're, I think, still the only project that's done it across a border, because we did Ireland and Northern Ireland. There's an international project, but I think we're the first who did it. And so you'd pick a judgment and you'd have a commentator or two commentators, and you would rewrite that judgment from a feminist perspective, but it has a very specific way of doing it. So you can't make up any laws, and you can only use law that existed at the time. You can only use research that was available at the time. So if you're rewriting, say, in Rewhite, which was the case about the Parades Commission here in Northern Ireland that Catherine O'Rourke did, you had to do it as in the time when that decision was made. But it was because some of the judges who came actually said that they really envied us because we had time to collectively draft these judgments, whereas as being a judge can be quite lonely as well. As a practice.
I think there were a lot of discussions within that project about what feminism meant in that context. So I think that's something I get asked a lot about the network, is sometimes people have a very lofty idea of feminist work being at the cutting edge of feminist legal theory. And of course, our idea of feminism is much broader than that, right? It's really talking about just different ways of looking at law and legal questions and who we centre in those legal questions. But I mean, that was a big debate that we had throughout that project, of people feeling that maybe they weren't feminist enough to be in a feminist judgments project, and us having to point out their excellent inherent feminism that was obvious in the things that they did.
I think that's why we really want to encourage people to join the network, is that you don't have to have done any feminism before or taught any feminism or published in any feminist journals or, gone on a march. If you're interested, come along. You can, there's no commitment to actually doing anything other than coming along and having a cup of tea. And
then I think also maybe that you don't have to have finished reading feminism. I have a wonderful PhD student, Lucy Crompton, who is writing an excellent and brilliant PhD thesis on breadwinner bias in English financial remedies law. But she was always like, she goes, I need to read more feminism before. I was like, no, you don't actually have to finish feminism before you arrive, because please get back to writing the rest of your PhD and not doing that. But I think sometimes people can feel daunted by the label that there's some kind of secret club that they're meant to know all of these kind of, fancy words and fancy terms. And
I have read all of the very famous people and not so famous people, and read them all.
Yeah, I read them all of the feminism.
As I'm going to quote Star Trek here to be totally nerdy, that you've only experienced Shakespeare if you've read him in the original Klingon, and I think you can cross that into a lot of people's feelings about different parts of academia, that you can only do Heidegger if you read him in the original German.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it is something that comes out quite strongly in other parts of the academy as well, that if you feel like if you go into an area with something that you'll be monstered because you haven't done 5 years of reading that would have come before. Yeah. And we're very much not like that.
No.
All levels of feminist knowledge are welcome. And even people who are not sure about the label of feminism, who just want to come and see what we're doing and what it's about.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, you can, there's always more to read, right?
Well, there's always more to read, because we're big nerds, Aoife, who took jobs in the academy so that we could just read for the rest of our lives. So I suppose...
When we're not, Mark.
When we're not grading, which of course we are doing all the time.
So we've had one event. Our very first event was kind of a networking event, which was fun to do, because I hate networking exercises, but then I could make other people do them.
Yeah, Aoife was, for someone who ostensibly hated traditional networking exercises, really was pushed some of them on us. But I suppose, again, it's about feeling welcome within a space. Like, there's nothing worse than you get sent in some kind of leadership training course or something like this, and you're told you have to walk like a man and talk in a deep voice so the men will understand you. It was more of an inclusive sort of thing. So people felt comfortable doing the exercises. What did we made them like tell us exciting facts about themselves.
On their name tags, and they to something that they'd read that they thought would be relevant for the group to read. So it could be a film that they'd seen or a poem, and we've actually on our website we've listed some of the things that people suggested. So I suggested a short story by Ursula K. Le Guin, called She Unnames Them. But people had films and Beloved, I think somebody suggested from Toni Morrison, and
there were
then some traditional academic stuff as well. And then people talked. They were up on big post-its on the wall, and then people talked to each other about them, which was nice.
It was nice, and people moved around, and we tried to avoid a situation where people were talking to their mates and heroes. That there was, and I think what was quite good is that we had a lot of different, people from different periods of time doing things. So we had like the very trendy Generation Zers who were telling us all sorts of sources that we had not perhaps read, and people who had been doing the feminism for a long time who had more classical sources, and it was a great kind of mixing pot of ideas and people, and a lot of fun.
Yep, and people kind of sharing happy stories and sad stories and frustrations and things that have gone well or badly. And I think we're trying to follow that up tomorrow in Queen's on May 19th. This is the first of our 2 workshops. Mm-hmm. So the tomorrow's one is about rapid reactions and sort of sharing experiences of how to do them or how to run big feminist projects. And probably by big, I just mean by number.
Yeah.
So we talked about the rapid reactions and the revite of the mother and baby home, but also things like the Judgments Project. But we've got Julie McCandless and Ruth Fletcher, who are both involved in feminist legal publishing, so do Feminists at Law and Feminist Legal Studies. So how do you, if you want to go to that end, the real academic end of trying to get more feminist stuff published and getting more spaces for innovative feminist work, but how do you do that? How do you edit a journal in a feminist way? How do you have a feminist editorial board? Which I know they Feminist Legal Studies really
think about that.
Really
they have
think
a whole
about that.
praxis of feminist practice.
But also then we've got Laura Callan and Ciara Fitzpatrick both talking about ideas of care because of the mother's place in the home.
The upcoming referendum of for the wording of Article 41 of the Constitution. So there's currently at this point in time, but it's due to close on Friday, government consultation down south about Article 41. So I think there's 3 aspects of it. So should we change the idea of the marital family being the only constitutionally recognised family form in Ireland? They want to talk about rewording the state valuing a woman's place in the home, and there's quite a lot of debate about the gendered aspect of that and also the valuing care aspect of that. And then I think there's another question about how we would remove gender discrimination from Article 41 of the Constitution. So again, this is sort of when we actually this consultation was not out when we set the date of the workshop. So this is like ultra rapid. Like the government consultation is actually seemingly going to be done within a shorter period of time than we ran this workshop. So we're going to have a very, very rapid, very, very rapid response to this, it has to be said. So we're having a discussion about care and how we might engage constructively with that process. So the idea is that the Irish government have said that they would like to do a referendum on Article 41 in November. And there's been a number of excellent pieces of work about the wording that a new Article 41 would take. We had a citizens' assembly. There has been a couple of government reports about it. Now they're going to consultation. So it's about feeding constructively into that process, even though perhaps you don't choose the parameters of that process. So you might, in your feminist work or the legal work that you do, have approached the problem differently. How do you then bring your work into that in a constructive way that helps bring issues of fairness to the fore and gender issues to the fore?
And I think somebody like Ruth Fletcher would be well able to talk about that, having been involved with repeal and campaigning for a change that what you would have done differently. You would have picked different words, you would have structured it differently, but you still think it's worth engaging. And with that, we've got Ciara Fitzpatrick, who's based at UU, and anyone's based in Northern Ireland know there's been huge stringent cuts brought in to Northern Ireland, which have really impacted on things like education, early childhood provision, but a lot of them will in fact impact women more as it's like a lot of the cuts are gendered and will work out as gendered, and Ciara has been working a lot on that, and it's around issues of care as well. So it's a sort of a similar question around care that's happening at the same time, I think, in both jurisdictions, coming from a different basis, one constitutional and one based around budget cuts coming from London, but having a gendered impact nonetheless, because it's in the home and the family that those budget cuts will impact.
And sort of really interesting conversations about what law does in different arenas, because constitutional referendums are about big aspirational statements, whereas budgetary cuts and things are more pragmatic, smaller things that perhaps you could have more influence over in particular times and hit people more directly. But I think that's another aspect of the network that we probably should really emphasise, is the pragmatism that we want associated. Like we call it doing legal work rather than writing, obscure legal articles, although that is also welcome. But just the pragmatism of it, of trying to contribute to these issues on this island in a way that brings women's voices to the fore and contributes to society. These are constructive responses that we are trying to build, just to help us have better legal responses to these things. And
after we do that one, we have another workshop. And that one's actually going to be about teaching, which I'm actually quite excited about, mainly because I want to see what everybody else does and then copy them.
That's brilliant. I actually just got my student feedback this week, and I had to close a feedback loop. So it was really interesting to hear what the students had thought of a more critical, gendered approach to teaching family law. And they generally loved it, I have to say. Yeah, one of them said I was a stone cold genius. So I'm now putting that on my CV for all time.
Because I think we both have experience of teaching courses that are specifically, and then trying to bring them into other courses.
Yeah, I would have to say that family law is a great Trojan horse to bring in kind of feminist issues into maybe a curriculum that hasn't had a big focus on gender studies, because it is so inherently obviously about regulating the structures in which women and children live, that it's very difficult not to do it from some kind of feminist perspective. And then
I'd say it's still possible, though.
It has been done. I refer you to the tradition of husband and wife law that continued for the last 100 years. But obviously designed by people who perhaps didn't think that way back in the day. But it is one that students can engage very, because everybody has a family. Nobody's born in a bubble, so people have either a kind of reasonably orthodox family life, or they don't. They come from a very different place, and in all senses, people very much engage in aspects to do with the family and have strong feelings about it. So that's a kind of exciting module to bring these ideas into in a way that people can engage with very easily, but don't feel like they're lofty ideas, because sometimes they come in jurisprudence, and I always feel like that can be slightly more removed, the way that they are introduced to students in that kind of scenario. But the teaching and pedagogy workshop is really exciting. I'm really looking forward to that.
Because I know Mairead Enright, our project partner, she does contract through feminism, and I'm teaching contract here in Queen's, so I'm really looking forward to seeing how she does that. Because again, it's not an obvious one, but actually when you talk about things like freedom of contract and autonomy and the reasonable person, or the person on the Clapham bus, or any of the other sort of classic tropes in contract law, all of them actually can be critiqued from a feminist perspective and have been critiqued from a feminist perspective. So I think there's, it's not just the very obvious topics that you can teach through feminism.
Yeah, and I think just this idea that, this decolonising the curriculum idea that law was designed by a very kind of niche group of powerful, rich people, and has these racial and gendered issues that need to be addressed. And one way to do that is through feminism. There are other ways to do that, but thinking about the default person in law and who law centres and who law ignores, I think they're really important questions to bring into any topic that you might be teaching. I mean, we bring it into first year modules as well. Pretty much any topic, I think.
And then after that, we have a final networking event where I will force people to do other networking games, the ones I didn't pick the last time.
Yes, and we're also going to come up with the feature of hopefully when we have because we're getting all the building blocks in place. We have our exciting new website. We have our
DFLW.ie.
DFLW.ie. Hashtag Love Irish Research, I think, is the IRC motto that we need to put with it. So it's really sort of building the network, but then also thinking with that second networking event where it could go, like what people want from it and how it could grow.
And how we could fund it.
And how we could fund it if anyone's listening.
Which is the most important issue. Because I think our hope is that the future of the network will be decided by the people in the network. Rather than us, which would be in a very unfeminist way, dictating where it should go in the future. And that, what kind of events that people would like to have, what kind of support that people would like to have, what, if they want online events and in-person events or no events at all, or like what kind of, because we've got space on the website for advertising events and we have mailing lists and things like that.
And
but how we can do things.
How best we can put people in touch with people fairly, because some people do know lots of people already, and some people come in to these kinds of issues from different ways in which they don't feel like they know a lot of people, and they, it's just about getting all of that together. And we have aspirations for feminist work in terms of improving the laws on this island, but we've also got aspirations for improving structures for doing, there's two aspects to the network. It's the substantive output and then also these supportive structures that we're putting in place, because you had a big list of them, didn't you? You had kind of mentoring and I read the list. I did. There was mentoring, there was what were the other things?
It was like coaching and peer support, even things like reading, like proofreading things, for being peer reviewing things in a friendly way, like offering actual substantive peer review as opposed to peer review.
Because I think
just says you're useless and this is the worst thing I've ever read, which often is peer review.
I don't think I've ever said that to anyone, but I have received that kind of feedback. But I remember Catherine O'Rourke was saying that one of the ironies of working in academia is that the further along you go, the more help you get.
Yes.
So it's trying to push that further down the ladder so that people have access to someone to read their work earlier on in their careers when it might be more helpful, before you get stuck in your ways and refuse to remove an Oxford comma from a sentence or whatever it is that you are going to, whatever hill it is that you're going to die on grammatically. Yeah.
So anyone, I suppose it's also an open call for people to get in touch.
Yes.
Because we'd really like, as I say, there's no necessity to have done any feminist teaching or any feminist research before. All career stages, including postgraduate students, are really, really welcome and are already there. Practitioners, activists, artists. Julie Morrissey, who's an amazing poet, gave a presentation actually at the Dublin workshop, or the Dublin networking event, and was amazing. And
I've now used
her
work in my teaching. So all aspects of the workshops are now going together. So.
And I think artists have been really important in getting legal reform done in the island, and I think they have an amazing artistic legal work, which is something I didn't think was a thing until I realised actually there's a huge amount of people who do incredible work and probably understand law in a way that I don't understand.
Or can talk to us about the bizarreness of law, right? Because if you don't have a law degree, you're like, what are they talking about, guys? And you're like, yes, it is very strange.
So all are really, really welcome. And across disciplines also, you don't have to have a law degree at all.
No.
At all. We had historians and sociologists at the last event and stuff, and you can be in physics if you'd like to come along. Anything.
Yeah, I mean, any definitions of feminist and legal and work are all. It's the doing that counts. That you're there and getting involved. And
so we have an email address, which is dfeministlw@gmail.com, which isn't the most helpful when I call it out loud.
Defeminist. That's very hard with a double accent. I don't know if I can do that.
But you could also email either of us at our institutional account and we'll add you to the email list.
Yeah.
So
and it's just
find us on our work
just to warn you, if
websites.
you've signed up to Eventbrite for the event, you do need to email us separately to put you on the mailing list, because they're not connected for GDPR purposes.
Yeah, and we're very clear on the GDPR
yes,
rules.
we're very good.
Or our website, which is dflw.ie. And we're both on Twitter as well. I'm on Mastodon. Are you on Mastodon?
I'm not on Mastodon. No.
I'm cool and I'm on Mastodon.
Aoife's cool. I have enough networks going on. We should really go on Instagram. I hear that's where people are going now that Twitter has taken over. Don't know.
God, you'll want a TikTok account next.
I will.
Do a dance.
For a TikTok, as us old folks were calling them the other day.
But please do get in contact through social media or through our work accounts or through the website. Yeah. Contact information will also be in our show notes.
And come and have fun and do feminist work, and the catering is usually good at these events. Eat cake.